welcome back to the Elemental Zodiac Animals World Building series. We are quite a few episodes into this, so please, if you are not caught up with what this is all about, go check out the playlist for it because we have a big one today and I don't want to waste any time. Ice Cat was the winner chicken dinner this round, so let's go. First, let's take a look at all the wonderful submissions my patrons did for this prompt. First up, we have a submission from Uro-san, W4. Ah, look at the Ice Cat! Oh, the tail, so pretty. I love his little face. And a little ice on his nose. That's great, love it. Next from Alexander. Oh no, so cold! And so mean. Oh, this one definitely has a story behind it. I want to know. Interesting. Next up, Shinko. Target acquired, a little piece of ice. Oh, I love giving my cats ice because they just poke at it with their noses and don't know what to do with it. Very cute. Charlie Draw Stuff. Ooh, a very ethereal entry with the Aurora Borealis like going into the cat or coming from the cat. Little ice footsteps. That is cool. I like this textured pattern you put on them as well. That looks really neat. Arapaima Colossia. Look at his little jacket! Oh, I love the big old tail. That's awesome. He's up to his waist in snow. My goodness. Very good, I love it. Very cute. A second one from Arapaima Colossia. Actually, it's probably Celosia, now that I'm reading that again. Ooh, oh, ooh, this is pretty. Oh. A very long, luxurious tail. Yeah, I love the fur weight you've got going on here. And I love anything like in a circle. That looks really cool. Excellent job. Sapphire of Night. Ooh, yeah, nice blue colors. He's looking up so intently with his little fangs. Great job. Hobohime. Oh, is it like a Doctor Strange cat? Oh, I love that actually. He's eating ice cream. Look at his little butt. I love this. Good job. Next up, Dappled. Oh, a little ice cat. Make it a little ice snow cat. Rainy Ferns. Ooh. Oh. Oh my god, and you could see the bones underneath. Oh, I love this idea. That is so cool. 10 out of 10 idea. That's amazing. I love that. Finley 213. Oh, little stray cat, but with ice powers, it looks like. Either that or like they're scooping up the snowflakes and letting them fall again. Very cute. I love your textured brush. That looks nice. Arrogant Oatmeal. Ooh, okay, this is another one that feels like it's got a story behind it. Are those like... Are they animals that are being imprisoned? In the, like, with the shackles tying them down? Or are they ice sculptures that have then... Or like, were they... I'm getting very Narnia vibes from this, where like the creatures have turned into ice. Oh, good job. I'm intrigued. Next up, Cody Cat. A Pokemon! Permafrost! Oh. Ice Ghost type. First stage evolves during an avalanche during night. Pokemon researchers still haven't seen the final evolution of this Pokemon. Oh, I want to see the other evolutions. This is so cute! And you know I love the purple-yellow eye combo. Beautiful. Squiggle E. Gibbons. Or maybe Squiggle Ewu Gibbons? I'm not sure. Oh, this one makes me feel sad. I feel so lonesome and cold. Oh, good job. I want to give them a big warm hug. Isaac the Reindeer. Oh, this one looks mean. I like it. I like a good ice heart. Very spiky tail and then the ice coming in after them. Good job. Willow the Lycera. Pretty design. And you know, I love the browns. Ah, this one comes with a note saying, Scatty is the leader of a clan of frost curse elementals that live up in the mountains. She's fiercely protective of them, but less than humble about it, believing she's the only one who can prevent them from harm coming to them. Love it. I love an egotistical leader type. Saturn Sage. Yo, pretty. Good job with those very light ice blues. You got just enough contrast there to make the design stand out, but yeah, I really like this color palette combo. Good stuff. Cora Mesture. Ooh, a whole character sheet page. Awesome. Ice Saber. Yo, the ice spikes go like right through it. Many scientists do not know the reason the middle ice spike wraps around the body of the creature, but some have theorized that it's for defense. Others think it can help the predator know how big it needs to be for hibernation, acting as a sort of measuring device. Oh, that's neat. Ice claws that, when unsheathed, ice seems to spread through its veins. And ice fangs. Night vision. Oh, bushy eyes for the cold. I love all the thought put into this one. Fantastic. Oh, and it comes with a second piece. Ooh. Another one to get me intrigued. I sent a journey soon to happen. Or maybe this one had to leave because of this thing that happened. Very interesting. Super cool. CQ Studios. Oh, a very literal ice cat. Oh, I love. Very simple, but perfectly effective. I love all the sharp points you added. Very cool. It really does feel like they are made of ice. Crystal Spirits. Oh, some traditional work. Fantastic. Yes, I love. Yeah, good job. Olive with an A. That's a funny name. Good job. Oh no, cat want fish. Cat can't get fish. That is very cute. Oh, so good. Ryder Dyer. Oh, we have a whole journal here. Okay, residing in cold mountain climates, the only reported sightings have been during snowstorms. According to various local legends, these creatures are the spirits of travelers who did not survive the harsh climates, though little has been found to prove that they do not behave like normal spirits. These creatures have been reported to be both helpful and mischievous, some guiding travelers to safety, others guiding them to their doom. They never attack outright. Water freezes on contact with paws. Very interesting. I love the journalistic approach to it. Very cool. Stormy Sky Studio. Oh, very pretty. Yeah, I love all your fur details. That is lovely. Beautiful work. And last but not least, Whitney. Giving us another piece of the pie and an ice cat. Meow meow. I love the ice ridge going down its back. Great job. Fantastic stuff, everybody. I cannot wait to see what you do next time. Remember that if you want to be in the next video or vote in the next prompt, you can do so by being part of my Patreon. Just $1 a month will let you in on the voting and submission process. Okay, so, world building for Ice Cat. Obviously, I had already introduced an Ice Cat into last time's story, Sasha's Lynx friend Blanche. I went back and forth a bit on whether or not to use him as my subject matter or create a whole new character. Because developing Blanche was appealing, since he is an important character, but making up new characters is always fun, and I can just kind of let the world building influence the characterization. I ended up choosing to stick with Blanche, but how I got there in the end had a lot to do with the world building, so let's talk about the Ice Magi for a hot minute. Now, in this world, we have all kinds of elemental magic going on, and ice magi and water magi are both a thing, which might seem silly at first, but I promise that there's a decent enough logic behind it. Okay, so water magi live in tropical areas, beaches, port towns, islands, all things that give me a very Pirates of the Caribbean vibe, you know? They control a lot of major trade between countries. We'll get more into them when the time comes, but you'll not be shocked to hear that Water Magi's magic helps them control water. I know, groundbreaking stuff. But this is all important to make clear before I talk about Ice Magi. So Ice Magi and Water Magi used to live together in the same group near the sea. Ice Magi were a kind of specialized type of Water Magi that also had control over temperature. Overall, Ice and Water Magi have a lot of overlap in their powers, but Ice Magi have the added bonus of being able to heat or freeze liquids. Long, long ago, when dragons were still the ruling force in most lands, an ice dragon decided that the Ice Magi should be their own people and gathered the Ice Magi on their back and flew them up into the snowy mountains to live. This ancient legend has different meanings for the Ice Magi and Water Magi. To the Ice Magi, it's their origin story, a point of pride amongst their people, and they honor and celebrated their dragons for taking them to their rightful home, jump-starting their own unique culture and traditions and becoming their own identity apart from Water Magi. To the Water Magi, this legend is proof of a greedy dragon splitting up their once great coexistence with Ice Magi in order to selfishly climb social rank and rule their own people. Either way, for hundreds of years now, the Water and Ice Magi have lived separately. And even though they used to hold a lot of grudges between their peoples, things between Ice Magi and Water Magi nowadays are much less hostile. For a multitude of reasons, but we won't be getting into that today. So, here is kind of where I hit my first real roadblock with this prompt. I could imagine the Ice Magi very clearly. They separated from the Water Magi long ago, and they happily live in the mountains, spending a lot of their time fishing, gathering food. They're able to regulate their own body temperature really well thanks to their magic, so the climate is always perfect for them. They have a strong sense of community that has a heavy emphasis on celebrating with food, oral history, and stories. They probably don't leave their hometowns much and have a bit of an isolationist streak. But there's one big problem. I really didn't feel like writing about a story in a snowy region. Mountains are cool, and snow is neat, I guess. And the fact that the harsh climate and weather wouldn't really be a bother for them for the most part makes their lives fairly idyllic. And they're socially isolated from the rest of the world, so how do I involve them in world affairs? But overall, I just really didn't want to write about it. The concept kind of bored me. Enough so that I thought about just scrapping everything I had been developing with the Ice Magi and trying to figure something else out. Because if I'm bored by it, then how do I expect other people to care about it one way or another? And then... and then I had a brilliant idea that mixed another idea I had with this whole Ice Magi thing, and not only did it solve my whole snowy mountains are boring problem, but ended up filling an important role in the world-building lore that I had wanted to establish. So, I set the whole mountain on fire and ruined the Ice Magi's lives. You know, for the sake of the story. You see, I hinted at it a bit in the last part, but Fire Magi have some pretty heavy laws restricting their magic in current times. And I don't want to give it all away now, but part of the reason for that is because of what the Fire Magi did to the Ice Magi. Destroying the Ice Magi's home and displacing the survivors is only a fraction of why Fire Magi are so hated and feared, but it's certainly a start. After the Fire Magi ravaged the lands of the Ice Magi, the remaining Ice Magi had to travel to other countries to seek shelter. At first, Ice Magi spread out in neighboring Earth and Plant kingdoms, and a few traveled back to their ancestral homes on the islands near the coasts. But after the Light Dominion ended the war with the Fire Magi and started creating peace treaties with all the other countries involved, the Ice Magi were left with very little say on what would be their fate. Most were encouraged to move again, but this time to the Light Dominion, where their magic was wanted in the elites' homes. Light Magi offered room, board, and salary to Ice Magi willing to come be house servants, kind of like regulate the temperature of their house, make them ice, that kind of thing. However, the Light Magi weren't too keen on hosting whole families who might still be together, so even more Ice Magi families were split apart. If they were lucky, maybe some of their Ice Magi children would be enrolled in schools with Light Magi children nearby, and they'd still be able to see each other. But for many orphan children, or the not-so-lucky, the handful of Ice Magi children that were left were sent away to various orphanages across the Light Dominion-controlled territories. There are small patches of Ice Magi communities that do their best to keep their culture and traditions alive, hopeful that one day another ice dragon might come and let them ride on its back to a new home. But with barely any children to pass their ways on to, and so much uncertainty of whether any of their magic trees survived, many Ice Magi recognize that their magic and traditions are at risk of being lost forever. It's all pretty heavy stuff for the Ice Magi to be going through, to be sure. It's tied some lore pieces that I had already brainstormed that were initially all kind of separate, nebulous ideas and put them together. And together in a way that I really ended up loving. It keeps the mystique and idyllic lifestyle of how I envisioned the Ice Magi, while also dumping a whole layer of trauma and awfulness onto their present situation that ties into the overall world building and makes them a bigger player in world affairs. It also makes for great fire versus ice conflict, and who doesn't love that old cliche? Anyway, I think I've given you guys all the context you need, so here's the part where I get to write in my own universe and read y'all a piece from it. This one ended up being a doozy, so enjoy. Well, this is it. Blanche clutched the bag to his chest. There wasn't much in there. Some food, a change of clothes, and the crystal dragon carving Blanche's older brother had made for him. A story had once accompanied the gift. A legend about a wise ice dragon that had flown the Ice Magi up into the mountains to start their own way of life. Blanche knew that there was more to the story, more legendary heroes of his culture that he should remember, but the details were all too far gone. After all, his brother hadn't been around to tell it since Blanche was just a little kid. When Blanche had been sent to the orphanage after several scary months of being relocated, living on the streets, and then finally scooped up by law enforcement, many older Magi had tried to take the crystal dragon away from Blanche, but he had bit them. Eventually, Blanche knew that he'd lose the last piece he had connecting him to his family if he didn't do something. So, he found a special hiding place for the figurine, and no one asked about it since. When Blanche had unearthed it tonight, he paused to admire it in the moonlight. Years of being buried and in hiding had left permanent dirt stains on the once perfectly white figurine, and little details that had been so prominent before had been weathered away. Blanche was overwhelmed by the sight of it, but he swallowed those feelings burning inside him, and gently but quickly put the dragon in his bag, concealing it in his wrap that could double as a hood if he needed to hide his identity. Blanche was leaving the orphanage tonight, alone. It had dawned on him to leave last week. He had looked in the mirror, and for a split second, Blanche had seen a glimpse of his brother staring back at him. Blanche had long forgotten the details of his brother's face, but in that moment, it had been like he was right there. And then, he was gone again. Something about that had shaken something awake inside of Blanche that he couldn't describe. And now he was standing in the doorway in the dead of night, ready to leave this all behind. His caretakers had given him housing and food for the last 8 years. Leaving meant giving that safety up. They had taught him how to be a respectful citizen of the Light Dominion, had drilled in obedience and self-reliance, so he was never a bother to anyone. They promised that if he was good and had good work ethic, he'd probably be able to work for a noble in the city using his ice magic. The way they talked almost made Blanche believe that it could be an idyllic aspiration to work towards. After all, there could be other ice magi in the city. Maybe... Blanche's paw hovered over the doorknob. Run! A chill wind smacked the side of the orphanage, and limbs of trees clattered along the windows. Blanche felt a chill run up his spine, and he turned the doorknob in haste and bolted down the white stone path leading down to the dirt road. The fur down his spine was fluffed out in a mixture of adrenaline and fear, but Blanche raced forward. The spirits of the wind heightened his fear, and felt like he was being pursued. Blanche recognized the river soon enough, about a mile southeast of the orphanage. He finally looked back to see if anyone was actually chasing him down. Would the Light Magi have set traps to find disobedient orphans like him? His heart raced. He reached into his bag to pull out the dragon figurine and wrap, pulling the worn fabric over his head and the hood up. He rubbed his paws over the crystal, its smooth, cool texture helping him catch his nerves. Finally sure that there was no one around, he sat next to the river. The dark water wasn't nearly as comforting as it usually was in the day. Blanche couldn't help but be a bit intimidated by it. But this was going to be his escape route, so he had best get used to the sight of it. After carefully putting the ice dragon back in his bag, Blanche scooted over to the river and cautiously dipped a toe in. It was a slight bit more chill than in the midday sun, but Blanche had swam in colder water when he was just a kid. He took a sigh of relief, and that sigh turned into a nervous chuckle, and that turned into a laugh. No one was around. Blanche was truly alone for what felt like the first time in his life. Though it all seemed crazy to him, this loneliness was somehow more freeing than he had ever felt before. He was still scared out of his mind, and sure that at any moment he would be caught and taken back to the orphanage. Or worse. But all his nervous energy gave him a little flicker of hope somehow. Now came the part he was most nervous about. He focused on his magic. He felt the current of the river like it was his own heartbeat. It urged him to go, go, go. The pull of the water tugging in a way that Blanche remembered having to get used to once he was sent here. The mountains had been so different. The snow, the elevation, the sheer cliffs, and the proud pine trees that held their magic. Everything here was bright and warm and suffocating. He took a deep breath and focused on his own temperature, the air around him, and the coolness of the water. It was so much easier to make little flurries of snow from thin air, or bring a pot of water to boiling. Blanche had practiced making ice sheets a few times, but this time it would have to be an ice sheet big enough to become his raft downriver. He had to calm his nerves and just focus on the task at hand. Come on, a narrow ice sheet I can ride to freedom, he thought. The air chilled around him. His paws went numb with cold. And the river's pulling became a sluggish protest as Blanche felt the water freeze under his command. The water resisted and made Blanche feel like his own blood had run cold, but he pushed onward. A cold sweat beaded on Blanche's brow, but he only focused on the water in front of him. He wasn't done until his fingers had lost all feeling, but he had done it. a raft just good enough for him to float his way down the river for the rest of the night. Tested his weight on it carefully as he rubbed warmth back into his digits and smiled with glee. When he was sure it would work, he quickly cast a preservation spell onto his raft to make sure it wouldn't melt completely on him, and climbed aboard his vessel. He could ride it until morning, catch himself some breakfast in the river, and then take to the roads again. With any luck, he would be out of the Dominion territory in a few nights, and to the ports of the Water Isles. It had to be better than here, right? And a port would be a great place to run into another ice magi. Days on the road had turned into weeks. Blanche had maybe underestimated how long it took to travel between 2 points on a map that seemed close together from his perspective. He stayed away from towns while in the Light Dominion, just in case. But once he crossed into Water Isles territory, Blanche chanced wandering into the first town he came across. He had hoped that there would be something different about this place, maybe even something that reminded him of home. After all, Water Magi and Ice Magi used to all live here a long time ago, so maybe? It was a bitter bug to swallow. Water Magi might live here, but Light Magi obviously made all the rules. Old buildings made of coral and seashell and stone were run down and unused, while clean-cut white and gold buildings were oddly fit next to them, bustling full of creatures buying and selling at the marketplace. He passed through town after town in similar states. He even got bold and chanced to steal a watermelon from a market. The fruit had been too good-looking to pass up after all of his walking in the hot sun, and with a little ice magic, it was always the perfect temperature. When Blanche finally made it to the sea, he stopped for a long time just to stare at it. He had heard about it, seen paintings of it, but looking at it was something entirely different. He felt his magic do somersaults in his guts. The pull of the water that he was used to was now accompanied by a strong push. It flipped his senses upside down, and Blanche was scared his heart might stop. Once again, everything was different, but Blanche welcomed it and took his time adjusting and just watching the sunset over the horizon. The port town, New Solaris, at first seemed to be just as disappointing as the other towns Blanche had walked through. But after a while, Blanche started to see all the other magi who passed through here. He witnessed types of magic he had never seen before, creatures he'd never seen before, and it was kind of mesmerizing. A speckling of space magi teleported in and out of the port, sometimes with other magi and sometimes with cargo. A few mind magi played instruments along the streets, their tunes hypnotizingly pleasant and serene. Blanche didn't have to worry about his hood any longer. No one noticed the young ice magi walking along the docks. He blended into the crowd easily. One day, a little otter fisherman watched Blanche intensely as he used his magic to freeze a fish mid-leap out of the water for his breakfast. The fisherman laughed good-naturedly and offered Blanche a job on the spot. And so Blanche suddenly had work. The fisherman was a good-natured water magi and taught Blanche everything he knew. And thankfully, didn't ask too many questions. But Blanche could sometimes feel the old otter's gaze questioning him. After work, the otter usually sat on the docks and smoked a pipe, and after a few weeks, he turned to Blanche as he was leaving. "So, have you got somewhere to go, young pup?" A sad look in his eye told Blanche that he had already guessed the answer. Blanche didn't go back after that. His few weeks under the otter's tutelage had afforded Blanche a small bit of funds, but not much. Enough to rent a room and put a roof over his head for the night, but Blanche would rather hold on to the money just in case. The weeks on his own had taught Blanche that he was perfectly fine sleeping under the stars, especially if he got far enough away from the town that drunks or law enforcement wouldn't bother him. As Blanche walked through the closed marketplace, He reached into his pocket and felt his paws glide over the crystal dragon again. As kind as the old otter had been, Blanche still had his heart set on finding more ice magi, but he hadn't run into any. He never asked around town for any specifics. Blanche still felt like keeping a low profile was the smartest option. He recalled something that the otter had said to him early on. "You know, I haven't seen an ice magi around these parts since before... well, never mind that." Blanche had done his best not to react at the time, but it had absolutely deflated him, like an ice pick had gone straight through his chest. He looked around to make sure nobody was nearby when he pulled the ice dragon out of his pocket and leaned against the closest stall. He heaved a heavy sigh. Maybe this statue truly was the last connection he had with his people. "Over there! We'll go search the docks!" An authoritative voice snapped Blanche out of his sorrows and into panic. He whipped around and saw several of the town's law enforcement running through the nearby street. Half of them were splitting up to head Blanche's way. Now that he was hyper-aware of his surroundings, he also noticed a thick black smoke rising from the far edge of town. He had seen smoke like that only once before. The smell hit the back of his throat, and Blanche could suddenly hear his brother's voice say, "Put your nose in your elbow, Blanche. Try not to breathe the ash in." The smell of smoke was still far away and not nearly as bad as it had been that day, but Blanche lifted his arm instinctively to his nose and ducked below the stalls. An officer, who was clearly a light magi, sent a blasting ball of light through the marketplace. Luckily, Blanche had hid under the tarp just before the light could singe his fur. Blanche was just about to take a breath when something with dark fur had put him into a stranglehold, and Blanche felt something metal at his throat. "Scream and I'll kill you." The voice was shaky and small, but Blanche could tell it was very sincere about its promise. He nodded slowly, and the black-furred thing loosened up a bit. Blanche didn't make any hasty moves. As scared as he was, he did not want to die by the hands of whoever was also in his hiding spot, and he also did not want to be caught by law enforcement. The dark shape let him scoot quietly away. He chanced to look back over his shoulder and saw a young black-furred she-wolf. Definitely a few years younger than himself. Still a child and not quite a teen. Her clothes were all but burned off her back, and she was covered in ash. But her teeth flashed white at him, and her dark eyes had a ring of bright yellow that glowed in the dark. Blanche felt his blood turn to ice. A fire magi. If anything could make Blanche call for the officer's attention, jeopardize his freedom, and risk death by stabbing, it was the idea of being trapped in close proximity with a fire magi. The little wolf could see the fear in his eyes, and she gave him a glare so fierce that it took his scream and seemed to shove it straight back down his throat. The heavy stomps of creatures rushing by ended the glaring contest, and both children huddled quietly under the stall, too afraid to breathe. Blanche couldn't help but stare at the child in front of him. She was panicking, and the yellow light in her eyes flickered dangerously. She shoved her paws into her armpits and huddled small and helplessly, suppressing sobs by burying her nose between her knees. If Blanche had the courage, he could probably snatch her knife away, maybe even pin her down and call law enforcement over. But he couldn't. He wasn't sure if he was moved by her distress or frozen by his own fear. When the footsteps had gotten further away, Blanche let out a heavy sigh. In the distance, he could still hear the faint sounds of the investigation continuing, so, for the time being, it was best to stay put. Now that most of the immediate threat of capture was gone, he could focus his disgust for the creature in front of him. A fire magi, Unsurprisingly, a criminal. I can't find a single ice magi around here, but of course I'd run into a fire magi. Just my luck. Probably her fault I can't find any. Well, actually, she is younger than me, isn't she? So I guess she wouldn't have been old enough. But she's obviously dangerous enough to have the whole force after her. A sudden worrying realization hit him. Did her magic burn any trees? Blanche tried to remember exactly where he had seen the smoke come from. What was even over that direction? He never needed to go to that section of town before. It was mostly where the nobles and their families live, if he had to guess by looking at the big fancy houses. The creature's sobs stopped, and she whipped her head up to snarl at him again. Were those even real tears, or was she just trying to get my pity? She looked ready to make another threat, or maybe even run, and Blanche knew that would only end poorly. So without thinking, he reached a paw out to grab hers and shook his head sternly, like he was telling off one of the younger orphanage children for misbehaving. "Don't run," he whispered. "It's still not safe out there." Her gaze went from shock that he touched her at all to confusion. Her head tilted to the side as she peered into his eyes. She leaned closer, examining his face like she was looking for something that should be there. "What's wrong with your face?" she finally whispered. Blanche gave her a stupefied look. "What do you mean?" "You don't have water magi markings, or light magi markings. Why do your eyes..." She almost looked hopeful. "Why do they look more like mine?" Blanche recoiled. "I don't look anything like one of your kind," he spat in a whisper that verged on a shout. She wrenched her arm away, and Blanche realized he had gripped her tighter in his anger. He scoffed under his breath. "I'm an ice magi, stupid." Confusion and anger screwed up the she-wolf's face, and she backed away again, angrily crossing her arms in a huff and putting them on her knees. But she didn't stab him, so that was a plus. Instead, she stewed over his words for a while. Tension between them almost crackled like lightning. Finally, she turned to him and asked quietly, "What do you mean, my kind?" Blanche gaped. What? How could he answer that? She wasn't serious, right? Was she dense? Did he need to spell it out for her? "A fire magi." He wished his voice had more venom, but he was too confused. Instead, it came out low, like he was explaining the concept to someone half her age. Her eyes widened, and she slowly turned to stare back at the ground. She lifted a paw to stare at it, then furrowed her eyebrows, staring back at him and looking between his eyes. "And you're an ice magi?" she asked in a small voice. "Yeah, now you know why I want nothing to do with you," he thought viciously. But at the same time, Blanche just nodded. Something about the puzzled look on her face quelled his anger. "What?" Her head seemed to be filled with questions, but whatever she might have asked seemed to be caught in her throat. So Blanche took over the conversation. "What did you do, other than being a fire magi anyway? I saw something on fire. Did you hurt anyone? Burn any trees?" If she was just playing stupid, Blanche wouldn't humor it. His accusation swelled his chest up with gusto, but he deflated when she continued to look perplexed. "Trees?" The little she-wolf looked like she didn't know what he was talking about. I don't think so. I don't know what happened. I was feeling bad when suddenly... and everything..." Now Blanche was really confused. "Feeling bad? You were sick?" She glared at him. "Do I look sick?" "I was misbehaving, I guess. I always mess things up, and Dad punished me. Today I just exploded. Blanche grit his teeth. Oh. So, the fire is coming from... She nodded grimly. So the fire was likely coming from her own home. That didn't really explain everything, but Blanche was starting to form a bigger picture. A creeping suspicion started washing over him, but in order to answer it, he'd have to choose his next words carefully, lest things get too awkward. No one wants to make the assumptions like the ones he was making, but the black fur of the little wolf could hide a lot of terrible secrets. Her answer could change a lot, particularly what happened after they got out of this mess. Fire magi or not, Blanche wasn't going to let an abused and frightened kid wander aimlessly into the arms of law enforcement. As much as Blanche hated the idea of it, keeping her away from higher powers was in his best interest now too. Where should he even start, though? Do you know anyone who could help you? Blanche tried gently. Any adults? She didn't even look at him when she shook her head, but her eyes did flicker over to look at his paws. Without realizing it, Blanche still had the crystal dragon in his hand, his thumb subconsciously rubbing its smooth features to help him stay calm. She looked confused again, and Blanche clutched it nearer to his heart. What is that? She seemed almost afraid to ask the question, especially when he leered at her for looking at it. It's mine, he hissed almost immediately and regretted it. Fine, I don't want to take it. Whatever it is probably stupid anyway. Blanche recoiled and sighed. If he expected her to open up to him, he would have to give a little in return. It's very personal to me. It's all I've got left of my family. The words burned coming out of his throat. That made her freeze. She looked at him sadly, her ears pulled back. Really? He nodded. He ever so cautiously held the dragon out, just enough for her to see it. It's an ice dragon, a very important one to us ice magi. Not that he could even remember its name. Her brows furrowed again, and she examined the little statue. She shook her head as though she didn't understand. Dragon? What's a dragon? So that basically confirmed it, Blanche thought warily. She basically knows nothing. Even though the dragons were gone, anyone with basic education would know what a dragon was. Anyone with basic education should know more about the different kinds of magi, and yet she only seemed aware of water and light magi. Hey, before today, have you ever left your house before? Blanche would have heard the fishermen gossip about a fire magi living in town if they knew, right? Or warned him about it? Something. That would mean that they probably hadn't even known, which would mean that they'd never seen this little wolf before. And if she'd never left her house, well, Blanche had seen a number of sheltered young'uns experience culture shock before when they came to the orphanage, but this was on a whole other level. She might not even know why you've been so mad at her, he thought guiltily. I went out in the yard sometimes, she answered kind of defensively. Mama would take me to the beach on foggy days, so I've been places, she added with a huff. Blanche's shoulders dropped. Oh, you poor kid. You're even more trapped than I was. She looked ready to ask something else when the footsteps suddenly started getting closer again. Blanche quickly held up a finger to his muzzle to silence her, and the two of them held their breath in fear. No luck finding the damn girl, one of the officers groaned. We'll have to warn the guards and send word to the neighboring towns. Can't have a fire magi running loose, especially not one that can do that kind of damage. Blanche could hear him shudder. Did you see what it did to Mr. Waters? Nasty stuff. Could barely recognize him. There was no response, but Blanche felt a chill go down his spine, and he swallowed a thick lump in his throat. He dared look at the young girl, and her eyes had darkened. He couldn't read her face. Her features held no sign of regret or guilt, just a vacant stare at the ground. Another one finally answered back, after a sigh and a shudder. Mrs. Waters was already in bad health. The explosion probably killed her before she knew what was happening. Poor folks. Didn't deserve to get saddled with a creature like that. From what I heard, Waters accepted the challenge with gusto. You know how he was. Real bootlicker to the light elites. But look where that got him. Don't know why we let the Light Dominion bully our nobles into taking these damned things. Keep your voice down. Chief won't be hearing you talk badly about any light magi. Still, if there's anything to be learned from all this, it's that you can't beat the fire out of them, even at this age. Ain't no fixing them. If I see that thing, I'm taking it out on the spot, no matter the orders. Ain't worth the risk, yeah? Yeah, I mean, now that it knows what it's capable of. Exactly. The footsteps and voices faded away, but Blanche still couldn't breathe. Beside him, the young wolf girl still stared vacantly at the ground. But slowly, her face screwed up into a mess of emotions. Her eyes glowed yellow, and Blanche swore he saw sparks behind them. He reached out a paw and placed it on her shoulder heavily, chilling it slightly to hopefully help calm her down. As the officer's conversation faded further and further away, big tears swelled up around her eyes, and she let out a sob and collapsed in Blanche's arms. Blanche didn't know what else to do but hold the younger kid awkwardly. He suddenly remembered his own big brother, and how he would hold Blanche whenever he fell or got beat up by other kids. He would just hold him and pat his back and say, "Don't worry, little iceling. I've got you." Blanche stared down at the wolf in his arms. She was all alone in this world, just like he was. And even though they should be enemies, she had been screwed over just as much as he had. Left with no one to truly care about or to trust. Could he trust her? He didn't know the first thing about her, even her name. She did just murder her own folks, even if it was provoked and an accident. But what else could he do? Leaving her to defend for herself would probably get her killed, or others killed. Yeah, the next poor sap to face her fire will probably be you. Her quiet sobs led to little hiccups, and Blanche pulled her in closer. He laid his head on top of hers and held the crystal dragon up closer so that she could admire its features. Her sobs stopped as she stared at it. "Don't worry, little fireling. I've got you." Whew! Alright, I told y'all that was a doozy. Had a ton of fun writing this one, and I'm super excited about the next prompt. What you got for me, guys? I'm ready. See you here for when it's ready, and until next time, stay inspired.
If you're inspo tanks and make no mistake, you've come to the right place. Just give Tennelle the time to straight up blow your mind with a new show of Drawing a Play.